I'm very excited to bring you on board, Rafael, and the call is yours.
Thank you, Rich, and welcome everybody. So as Rich said, I'm currently at Microsoft. The specific team that I'm working now is called Microsoft Digital, which has had other names in the past, but I think one of the old names that makes it easier for you to understand what it is was Microsoft IT. So you can think about it as the internal IT of Microsoft, which is huge, as you can imagine. And basically my responsibility as a senior finance manager there is to make sure I handle all the financial planning, all the financial analysis for one of the subgroups that are part of this big Microsoft digital team. And one of my main responsibilities in this role is to actually manage our Azure spend. So for you who are new to this cloud world, Azure is the brand of the cloud computing services offered by Microsoft. And as you can imagine, the Microsoft IT, or Microsoft Digital as it's called now, is a big internal customer of Azure within Microsoft. So it's my responsibility to make sure that our Azure spend fits within our budgets. And budgets is what we're going to be talking about today. And I have a case that I think is very interesting of an analysis that I did, which actually was based on an analysis made by my manager and his MBA intern. And it was so interesting that I thought I could use it on a daily basis and share with you today. So with that, let me move to the next slide. So what exactly is budget management? I'm pretty sure all of you know, but just to give make sure everybody's on the same page. So when I think about budget management, I think there are three main buckets, right? So that you are successful in this sense. The first one is budget preparation, right? So typically once a year, a few months before the beginning of the fiscal year, you have the budget preparation, which is where you're going to set how much your team that you support is going to be allowed to spend in different spend categories, like full-time employees, vendors, in my case, Azure as well. So that'll be the first component. The second component is the financial analysis, right? So you can use financial statements, you can use financial tools to compare how your actual spend is trending and how it compared with your budget. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that how much you spend fits within the budget that you set in the beginning of the fiscal year. And lastly, financial forecasting, right? So a good finance manager not only looks backwards, but also, and even more importantly, looks forward, right? So you're going to be able to go back to your business partner and say, hey, you're spending X percentage of your budget. If you continue with this trend, you face the risk of maybe going over budget in 1 or 2 or 3 months of whatever. So this third component of financial forecasting is one of the most important ones, and is actually one of the ones that we're going to be focusing on today's presentation for this analysis. Okay. So moving forward, what was the issue that I was trying to solve? What is the problem that I was trying to solve, and what is the kind of scenario that we're going to walk you through today? So as I mentioned, Azure was one of our spend categories in my group, right? And the interesting thing about Azure is that at Microsoft, we are able to track it on a daily basis. And the reason for that is that when you think about Azure, not only Azure, but many of the cloud services, you have a model of payment that is pay as you go or consumption based. Think about your utility bills, right? So if you spend more energy in your house because you have more electronics, you have, let's say, video games, you have computers, you have televisions. If you use more energy, you're going to pay more in the month, right? And it's the same thing with Azure. And as I said, we are able to track that daily. And a situation that we faced is that our Azure spend was growing. So I got the task of trying to look at this consumption more closely. And not only that, but being proactive and going back to my business partners and say, hey, you are spending a lot. If you continue with this trend, you're going to go over budget. And let me just explain to you a little concept we have with Azure and cloud in general, which is subscription. So think about subscription as kind of your credit card bill, right? So if you have a credit card, you spend with food, you spend with electronics, you spend with clothes, you spend with transportation, and then in the end of the month, you get a bill with all that you have spent. With Azure, it's the same. If you think about a company, you have many different groups in this company. Let's say all of these groups use Azure. Each one of these groups is going to have a subscription that in the end of the month is going to come with a bill saying how much this group needs to pay. So let's say that you have a group that uses storage, you have a group that uses compute, you have a group that uses many kind of different cloud services like virtual machines and etc. So this is what a subscription is. And in my group, I had more than 800 subscriptions to track. And again, my goal was to be able to do an analysis in which I would get data, understand which were the subscriptions that were going potentially over budget, and then go back to these groups and communicate that, hey, you need to reduce your spend, you need maybe to optimize, and take it from there and see if you can go back over on budget until the end of the month. Okay, so that was my objective. What about the actions? What actions did I take? So first, and I'm going to walk you through in details on that. First thing I did was get the data. And in the case of Microsoft, our data source was what I call Cube. And then you'll see that I needed to take a lot of intermediate steps of working with the data that took some time of my working day. And then with that, I was able to create some metrics that in the end of the day would allow me to create a chart that is the banana chart, and you're going to understand why this name, and eventually share that with the business that I supported. Okay, so problem one: how did I use all this data that I had access to get the insights that I needed to share with my teams? We have some slides that explain the step-by-step, but I think it's going to be easier if I move over to Excel and give a quick demonstration of all the transformations that I needed to do with data. And then, as a next step, I'm going to show you how PassPlot really helped me to be able to do the same kind of steps, but in a much faster and more agile way. So let's start with the Excel component. Rich, can you see my Excel now? Just to confirm.
Yes, I can, Rafael.
Perfect. Okay, so the first step that you see here is the data that I was able to get from my data source, from Cube. Basically, what I have here is some dates and the daily consumption for each day. Obviously, this is hypothetical data, so let's consider this is to be a hypothetical subscription that I was analyzing in my work. If you see here, my data ranks from January 1st, 2020, all the way to March 13, 2021. So let's suppose that I'm in this date, March 13, and I want to understand how my March consumption is going to look like if I continue with this trend. Well, at first, I have a bunch of numbers. I have daily data. How can I really take insights from there? That's when my transformations start. That's when I start to spend my time to kind of work on the data to finally be able to move to a chart. So if you go to the next tab, the Prepare Data Excel tab, basically what I have here from columns A to D is the same data that you saw in the other tab, with the only difference that I separated year, month, or day, and then daily consumption. So whatever I have in gray here, this is the data that I had before. I also included in column G the budget that I had for each month, which is something that I had access to, right? Because it's past data. So basically what I'm saying is that for January, so every time you see one as a number, the budget for that number was 200K. I'm just repeating these numbers. And then for February, it was the same. For March, it was the same. If you see here, when you start April, this number changed. That means that the budget for April was slightly higher. So that's what this data is telling me. Okay, what I wanted to accomplish out of that. So I wanted to be able to see the daily consumption and see how we were trending in the months. The first conclusion that I could think of is if we reach half of the month and we have half of the budget spent, that means we're on track, right? Well, not exactly, because that would be true if the consumption was uniform throughout the month. But what about seasonality? What would happen if I have a subscription that typically has more of their consumption in the second half of the month? And then when it's exactly half of the month, they have already spent half of the budget or more. So it doesn't really matter to me looking at the numbers without a context. I really needed to look at the historicals and see how does the seasonality of each month comes into play for me to be able to reach to a kind of specific conclusion. So that's why I did these transformations here. In column E, I pretty much calculated the daily consumption accumulated. So basically, of course, in the first day of each month, it's the same. But then in the 2nd of January, I pretty much added the first 2 days. And then in the 3rd of each month, I pretty much added the 3 first days, and so on. So when you reach the end of a specific month, you have the total that you spend in that month. And then when you change the month, it goes back to the beginning, to the first day, and so on. So basically, the first transformation I did was accumulating that consumption. Okay. In column F, I did the same calculation, but on a percentage terms. So what I mean is that on the first day of January, I had already spent 14% of the total for that month. So you can see there's a seasonality here. You can see that typically in the first day of each month, you have a larger consumption, which makes sense in that case. And then when you reach the last day of the month, you reach 100%, which makes sense, right? Because in the end day of each month, by definition, you have spent the totality for that month. And then I did the same calculation for all the months until March 13, which is my last day here. And obviously, I can't know the percentage here on the March 13 because I don't know how much I will have spent until the end of the month. And then lastly, in column H, I calculated another percentage, but in that case, the percentage of the budget. Okay? Moving to the next step, metrics. So I wanted to be able to compare how does each day of the month, so now I'm talking about the current month that I'm in, which in that case was March 21st. If you remember, the last data point that I had was March 13th. So that's what I'm analyzing. And this is where I created the metrics that I'm talking to you about. What I'm saying is that until the 13th, I had already spent 51% of the budget for March. But how does it compare to my historical data? That's where the 3 additional metrics here come into play. The first one is 3 months average attainment. What does that mean? That means that if I take my previous 3 months, on average, by the 13th of each month, I had spent 47% of the budget, which is lower than 51%. Column E, highest attainment ever. If I take all the historical data that I have, what was the maximum of the total spend that I had already spent on the 13th of each month? So if I take every 13th of each month in the past, what was the maximum attainment ever? 51.6%. And then column F is the opposite. What was the lowest attainment ever? 35.1%. And that's where the banana chart comes into play. And as you can see, it kind of reminds a banana shape. That's why the chart has this informal name. And what I'm saying is that on the 13th here of this month, I have already spent 51.6% of the budget. And then this chart really gives me kind of a comparison and kind of like some guardrails to see how does that compare with historicals. So in the 3 last months, this number was 47.6%, so I'm above the average. And really, I'm kind of close to the highest attainment ever on a day 13th of a given month. That says that there's a pretty good chance that if this subscription continues with this trend, it might go over budget. So that's why all this data come into play, and that's why we believe this chart is helpful. Going back to our presentation, you can see that I needed to take a lot of steps, and that was for one subscription, right? I needed to analyze other subscriptions as well. So you can see here there's a summary of everything that I did, creating the metrics, eventually creating the chart. Here comes the second element. How could I be able to do that in a much, much faster way? That's where PassPlot comes into play. So if you go back to Excel, I only need this data to be able to do the same analysis in PassPlot. The daily consumption, first and last date, and the budget for the month that I'm analyzing. How can we do that in PassPlot? Let me bring here my PassPlot. I just type /analyze, play. As you can see, there are many things you can get out with PassPlot. I'm going to choose charts. The one that I'm interested in is banana chart, so I'm going to click banana. I have data by day. So the first thing I need to paste here is my daily consumption. The only transformation I need to do is to put / in the headers, as you can see here, and then copy all my data. So I'm going to paste here. This is the budget that I have for that month. my target value, which is 250K. I have that in the Excel spreadsheet. This is the first date that I have data for, which, as you might remember, was January 1st, 2020. This is the last date that I have data for, which is March 13, 2021. So I'm going to select that date. I want to show the upper and lower limit as I did. You could choose only upper or lower if you wanted. I want to go with both. I want to do 3-month average as I showed to you, but you can do 5, 6 month average, whatever you wanted. I want to do. I don't want to do moving average. This is something that I could do as well, but I don't want in that case. And I'm just going to call that chart banana chart subscription 1. Submit. So now the app is running the work on the back end, and as you can see, in a few seconds, 2 to 3 seconds, I have that exact same chart as before. Let me show you again on Excel so that you can compare in a more visual, compelling way, and show the same information. And what I needed to take approximately 20 minutes on Excel, obviously I showed to you in a fast way, but what I kind of spent 20 minutes with FastPlot, I can do in 2 minutes. I have all the data points that I need, and I have the same chart that I was interested in. So going back to our presentation, this is where FastPlot really can help you, and it definitely helped me. You pretty much cut the time that I spent in this analysis by 10 times. And then again, here we have a summary of why. This is all the steps that I needed to take in Excel, get the source from my cube, create my transformations, create my metrics, build the slide, the chart. With FastPlot, you just need the dates, the daily data, sorry. You just need first and last date, budget, and boom, you have the banana chart in 2 to 3 seconds, okay? If you think about the accumulated work that goes into it, it's pretty big, the amount of time that you can save. So as I said, it took me about 20 minutes to build that on Excel, which is the left part of the chart. With FastPlot, we're talking about 2 minutes tops. It's a 90% decrease in the effort and the time that I needed to spend to do the same kind of analysis. And just to give you an idea of how that can translate when you think about a year. So I would say that January, I needed to prepare like 5 charts of that kind, twice a month. That's 120 times a year. If you multiply that by 20 minutes, it's 40 hours. So it's a full working week, if you think about it, in the end of a year. If FastPlot, if you consider that it was 10 times faster, we're reducing from 40 hours to 4 hours. So it's really 36 hours that you're free to yourself in order to be able to really do the kind of work that generates the real value as a finance manager, which you can call kind of like the 3 C's: communicate, convert, care. So provide the insights, provide the recommendation, and really partner with your business partner and give forward-looking recommendations. Again, you're not spending time with data manipulation, which doesn't really have a lot of value, and you're going to be able to spend time with the part of the work as a finance manager that really adds value to your business partner. So in summary, that's kind of the analysis I wanted to share with you. That's just one of the many cases that FastPlot really helped me save a lot of time. And with that, Rich, I'm going to hand it back over to you to kind of give any final insights onto that and potentially open for questions.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. I'm so excited that I got a chance to work with you on this and to give you some precious time back for your professional life so that you can be more effective at what you do. That's what we do at FastPlot. We take the data load off your back and we give you fast and fluent workflows in the cloud that saves you an enormous amount of time. I'd like to just open up the floor now for some questions. We do have 8 minutes left. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll kind of get things kicked off here. Rafael, maybe just a quick question for you. You mentioned you do about 5 charts a month, so you're contacting a lot of subscribers. Can you talk a little bit about the timing of how the budget management works? You've produced a chart. When do you produce the chart during the month? How frequently do you check up? If you talk a little bit about the overall time picture of the budget management.
Yes, and we actually have one additional slide that I think is going to be helpful to answer this question, because if you think about it, when you have daily spend, there's a trade-off there, right? Because on the one extreme of things, you could be looking at the data every day so that you can really act fast when you see changes in the trend. But think about it. If you had to do that 30 times a month, it's just a lot of time. In the other extreme of the spectrum, you could do that in the end of the month, but then you don't really have time to act, right? So what is the fine balance that you can find when you have this amount of data in such a frequent way to be able to, one, provide the insights in a timely manner, but two, don't take all of my time as a finance manager just doing the same kind of analysis. So the way that we did in that particular case, we used to do that twice a month. So typically, I would wait 10 days after the beginning of the month, do this kind of analysis with 20 days of remaining month. And then I would identify the subscriptions that were kind of like yellow light with that and kind of send my communications to these subscription owners on the 10th. And then typically I would wait about 10 more days. So on the 20th of each month, do the same kind of analysis again for the remaining 10 days of the month. So again, there's no right answer on that, Rich, but in that case, we found that the good balance would be twice a month. And then again, just because our spend was running hot, as we say, when you have a situation that you have even daily spend, but it's more controlled, you don't need to do that as frequent. You can maybe do that once a month, maybe on the 15th. But in our situation at that time, we found that twice a month was the right balance between the transactional costs of time that it needed to be able to do so, at the same time having enough time for the stakeholders to act upon our insights.
That's great. No, thank you, Rafael. That makes it very easy to kind of see the overall picture.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about how did you come up with the banana chart? It's actually it's very interesting when I started working with you. I actually, I've been in statistics and analytics for almost 20 years, but that wasn't a chart that I was really very familiar with until I met you. So I'm kind of curious if you can just share with the folks here a bit about the history.
Yeah, so I had never heard about it as well. But then there was a situation that we had an MBA intern in my team, and my manager actually gave this intern a project. And for this project, he used the banana chart. And I found it very interesting, and honestly, I see a lot of applications on that. So this one that I showed to you is obviously one of them, in which you have costs that you want to track. And the good thing about the banana chart is, and that's why it has this shape, right, is that you can kind of set guardrails. You can kind of set an upper limit and then a lower limit. And it gives a very visual, compelling way to showcase to your business partners, hey, you are very close to the historical highs of that time of the month, or you're very close to the historical low of that time of the month. So that's why I found it compelling for me to use in that case. But if you think about it, there are like many, many other applications you can use it. You can think about a sales team. Let's say that you have a sales team that has a sales target in the end of the month, and you're able to track sales data by day or by week. And then you can do the same kind of analysis. So typically around the 8th of each month, you should have sold 20% of your target, and you have only sold 18. So that can completely go in a kind of banana chart analysis as well. So that's another application. And even if you think about personal finances, so typically I have my salary, typically around 1/3 of the month, I have spent half of it. So how am I trending this kind of year? So anyway, there are really tons of applications you can think about when it makes sense to have this kind of upper and lower limit, thinking about historicals. But again, to answer your question, was in this specific project that my manager gave to my intern, and it was just like it fit perfectly with my responsibility of looking at Azure spend on a daily basis.
No, that's great, Rafael. Very exciting, and again, very honored to be able to work with you and help you with your needs there, given the amount of time it took to you to make a banana chart. So I have so far a question from Gada Al Hussein regarding PassBlock. So it's a freemium. So first 30 days are free, and after that, it's a very affordable subscription from that point forward. Feel free to go to the passblock.com website and check it out, and also reach out to me. I would also put that extension out to everybody here that if you have a use case that you would love to automate, we are open for business in the sense that we'd love to hear from you, and potentially we could partner with you to help put a solution out there in the world that would be beneficial to you and potentially other financial professionals out in the world. Is it possible to import a base to PassBlock, have a limit for capacity? Marcos, can you just can you come off mute, please, and just what do you mean by the base?
For example, Excel has capacity limited to 100 lines. Passport have a limited to capacity.
Okay. That's a really good question. So, Passport is an IM functionality, really behind the scenes, and in principle, it's text. So the limitation is really on the user experience on the front end. The way that Rafael has it today, I put it in Slack, and there is a limitation there, but you can see that Rafael was able to obtained like 18 months of data, and he was able to do some productive work there. At some point, there is a limitation on the UX based on simply of the fact that that user interface is in Slack. In part of my development roadmap is that I would like to take charge of that front interface, if you will. And at that point, there should be no capacity because it's just text, and it could be as large as possible, and everything is very compressed. So your request is very, very text compressed, so you can actually squeeze a lot more into that than you normally would. But I think with the current capacity, there's a lot that you can do. Marcus, reach out to me also for. I'd like to hear more from you as far as what kind of analysis you do, and we can kind of talk about, the borders of capacity and understand a little bit more about your need there. Happy to talk to you anytime.
Yeah, just to that, Rich. So in my case, as you said, I had daily data, which is typically pretty heavy, and I had actually it was 15 months of daily data, which was a lot, and it still runs super fast. So it would be even possible to have even more data on that. So.
Absolutely. Guys, we're at 12:30. We want to give you time back and stay on topic and on time. So thank you so much for your participation today. It's been really great. Rafael, you're awesome. That was a great presentation. Folks, enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. And look us up. Feel free to connect with Rafael and myself on LinkedIn, as well as follow Passport at our LinkedIn page, or go visit our website for some additional details. Look forward to talking to you soon. Take care. Thank you, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you.